Topics may be controversial. Ongoing research confirms our positions. Do your own due diligence, understand the concepts, and arrive at your own conclusions. Please feel free to reflect your considerations and opinions in the comments section.
Central banks are predators. In today's world, the wealth of countries does not accrue to the people of that country, but to central banks. This article mentions some of the reasons why central banks eventually collapse the economies of the countries in which they operate and enslave the people. First of all, central banks are not bound by the constitution of the country in which they operate, so they are extra-legal entities that dictate the financial state of the country. Brainwashing through the education indoctrination system teaches that governments with their own sovereign money will cause economic distress. However, the contrary is eventually proven in every case. Almost none of the central banks are audited, which begs the question, why are such entities trusted at all? Central banks do not pay taxes. If everyone else is forced to pay taxes, why not the central banks? It is said that the central banks provide liquidity to a country as buyers of last resort. How is that even possible? Currency is created in an arbitrary way, creating a loan on which citizens must pay interest. This means that all currency created is based on debt and credit, not any actual wealth. There is no central vault in any central bank. If central banks alone create and loan currency at interest, how can it ever be possible for a country to repay such a loan? Inherently, central banks have to rely on some standard where every loan can be tallied. This is the reason why central banks still value gold while projecting the notion that gold is not a store of wealth in the current era of fiat currencies. In practice, private parties or corporations exist to maximize their profits. This is the sole purpose of private business. Central banks are no exception, and that reason they provide loans to governments is to make a profit from the country given the loans. Politicians take loans to provide free goods to uninformed voters, making it easy to make a few politicians rich, with the central banks providing convenient loans. In this fashion, countries are entrapped in a scheme of ever-increasing debt, and eventually they default as ever more currency is created, and each currency unit created causes every previously created currency unit to lose value. Governments and central banks have a negative symbiotic relationship which leads to bankruptcy. Apart from the central banks, we now have global banks like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the European Union Bank, etc., which can now extend their reach internationally. It is thus very important for the citizens to know how central banks work, acting as predators with policies that inevitably have adverse consequences. It is better to have natural free money like gold or virtually created currency like Bitcoin, since it is not possible to create an infinite number of these currency items at will. The rarity of real monetary items is better than currency created endlessly at will. Governments ban actual money and prefer fiat currency so that people are not self-sufficient, but actually eternally dependent on their government, and can be taxed without their knowledge, even as the government is eternally dependent on the central bank. To avoid this circle of debt, there must be made a constitutional rule that government cannot give or take loans on behalf of its people. This way, government cannot make a hostage of its own country or any other countries financially by giving away cheap loans. This is why in some Christian and Muslim cultures, usury is considered a crime. After World War I, Germany was reeling under hyperinflation because of its bad policies of government and predatory behavior of its central bank. Adolf Hitler ended the central bank and the interest-based economy, issued their own currency, and within 3 years, Germany was the most economically forward country in Europe.